Welcome again, everyone, to our next of our series in the industry research seminars. As you all know, this series at Gladstone is dedicated to help postdoctoral scholars and senior graduate students with the skills that they need to successfully transition to an industry research career. As you see, today's seminar is going to be with Bill Lindstaedt, a longtime friend of Gladstone, and he's been with UCSF for a very long time. And he's going to be talking to us about how to negotiate your industry job offer. So with that, I will be introducing our today's speaker, Bill. Bill, as I mentioned, has been with UCSF for over 25 years. Since 2001, he has been advising careers practice for exclusively with PhD level scientists. Specifically, his expertise has been with helping people transition to industry careers. And also he's one of the co-authors of My IDP, which many of you are familiar with and obviously use it as part of our performance appraisal and previously with your PhD education as well. He has given numerous career development talks across the country. And I think I am very proud of the fact that I consider Bill my mentor and a close friend for the last 7+ years. So with that, Bill, it's all yours. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for the invitation and a very kind introduction, Sudha, and the feeling's mutual. I consider you an advisor to me as well. So this is a topic that's my favorite one to present on, which is how to get more money, basically, when you get your first job offer from industry. And I'll say a couple things before I start. First is, I guess if I just went straight through these slides, it would probably only take about 40-45 minutes, but we have a lot more time built into this because when I do this talk, normally it's full of questions. So I want you to ask questions when you have them. It makes the dialogue richer, and it gives me an idea for how to make the presentation better in the future when I hear what I'm not covering. So feel free to raise your hand or just unmic yourself. There's not that many people here. And ask the question or put it in the chat box. And Emma or Sudha, will you be here the whole time? So if I don't see in the chat box, just interrupt me. And then I'll build in some time. So feel free to ask a question anytime you want, but also build in some time where I just stop and ask you if you have anything. Let's see. I guess the other thing I would say about this workshop is it's come 100% from all the stories that I've worked through with graduate students and postdocs who've been moving to industry over the years. So as Sudha said, I've been here a long time, and I've worked with lots and lots of students who have gotten, and postdocs who have gotten jobs in industry, and have come into the office and said, here, I'm getting a job offer, what do I do? Or I have a job offer, how do I ask for more? Or it seems like it's not competitive, how do I know it, whether it's going to be competitive or not? So lots of these questions come up. And then I've just tried to put sort of all the answers into sort of a seminar format. So I hope it is helpful for you. So what I will talk about is, there's sort of several sections. One is I have a framework for you that simplifies compensation negotiation. So maybe this will get more complicated as you go through your career and when you're negotiating to be vice president for research at Amgen, it'll be more complicated than this, but there's just a few things to think about. And I've talked to people who are approaching the job market, and they're like, "Well, I'm reading all these books on how to negotiate and the theory behind negotiation." Or one person took an MBA class in negotiation before they went on the job market, and it's not that hard. So I'm going to simplify this with a little framework, and then we're going to talk about. Let me back up. It is very hard. It's difficult. You've never had to do this before, but it's not that complicated. So it's hard, and I sympathize with that, but it's not complicated. So I'll try to simplify that for you at the beginning, and then we'll talk about several times that negotiation issues come up. One is sometimes you get asked, if you're to move, you're still in the interview, you don't have the job offer yet, and they ask you how much money you want to make. That's one set of approaches and responses. And then the next time it comes up is you get the job offer and they tell you how much what the job offer entails. And they ask you to respond to the job offer immediately. So how do you handle that? So we're offering you all these things and this much money. Are you willing to take that? And this is on the phone. So how do you respond to that? And then you get the job offer. What kind of goes in? What's a typical job offer look like? And then finally, when you want to ask for more, how do you ask for it? So that's kind of the outline for the seminar. So this simplifying thing, there's really three parts of the negotiation process when you get offered your first job after your training period. There's what it is that the negotiation item is for. So the start date or the salary or the signing bonus or the stock options. So what is it that you're asking to negotiate for? And then you ask for it, there's the response that they give, and there's some action that you take. And the types of negotiating items actually divide up into two parts. One is a must-have, and there's four. So this is something that if they don't say yes, you're going to turn the job down. And we do see this sometimes, and typically, I'd say most often it's not around salary. It's most often around start date. They need you to start next month, and you're not going to be done for 6 months or something like that. And so that's usually the most common thing we have for must-haves. But whatever it is, you're asking for this and this one thing, and if you don't get it, you feel like you have to turn the job down. So there's only four possible responses. Yes, we're going to give you what you asked for. Maybe, probably not, or no. And similarly, there's the nice to have things. And this is how most of the job seekers that I work with, most of the people whose examples went into this workshop, most of the things they were asking for are nice to have. You've offered me a decent salary. I would like to ask for a little more. You want me to start, in 4 weeks, and I'd like 2 months, or something else about the compensation. But it's really the same answers, right? Yes, we'll give you what you asked for. Maybe, probably not, or no, we can't do that. However, the actions that you take based on what happens here might be different. If it's a must-have and they say yes, then yay, this is awesome. You gave me what I wanted. Let's move on to the next point that I wanted to negotiate for. Or when you're ready to close, you say, you've given me a lot to think about. I really appreciate this conversation. Can I have a day and get back to you? So if you can, you always want to have more time in all of these. We'll talk about that process later. If they say maybe, that's possible, then it's a must-have. And so you actually need a firm answer. And so you ask for the firm answer. Can I get a firm answer on that? It's important enough that I won't be able to move forward without it. And this is the only stumbling block to me saying yes. Same answer if they say probably not. You want them to give you a firm answer. So you're asking them to go back and find out if they can do that or not. If they say no, you've already decided that that's a must-have. And so this is where you're stepping away from the job offer. I'm sorry to hear that. I wish you all the best in the search. If something changes on what I've asked for, I hope you'll contact me again. On the nice-to-haves, it's either yes, yay, I got what I wanted, and the same response. That's possible. So they're kind of signaling maybe they can do that. And so probably you'll want to say, can you follow up on that? Can they check on it? And then you move on to the next point. Thank them for their flexibility because they're going to go do some work for you. They're going to say that's difficult or probably not. And maybe if it's not that important, you sort of move on from that one. The same as if, no, we just can't give you that. So this is our negotiating theory class of 101 in 5 minutes. And that can save you a lot of time from reading all the books out there about negotiation. Not that they're not good, and I'll recommend some at the end, but I think the goal of putting this up there is to sort of take the complexity out of what is salary negotiation when you're moving on from your first job. Any questions about that before we move on? Seem clear? Okay, so we'll move on. I mentioned there's several times that negotiation issues come up during the whole process of getting a job offer. And the first one is when you don't have the job offer yet, when you're asked during the interview, a tough interview question, one of the toughest ones to prepare for. So if we were to move forward with a job offer, what are your salary requirements? And you hope that this doesn't come up, but often it does. I would say more than half the time it does. At many companies, they've already decided what they're going to offer you, and so they don't ask you. In fact, at most companies, they know within a very small bracket what they're going to offer you, and we'll talk about that shortly. So a lot of, I guess, especially bigger companies don't ask that question, but often it does come up, and the strategy there is to not quote an actual figure. So you'll give sort of a range, and I have some examples here in a minute. The best is if you don't actually have, sorry, that's wrong. The best scenario doesn't come up. Second best is you can give a response that's so vague that you haven't actually told them a number. And I have an example of that. The third best then is if they really press you to give some kind of a figure, then you'll give them a range instead of a hard number. And so what that might sound like is, I'm very interested in this position because of the science, and the team seems great, and the company's very promising. If we were to move forward to an offer, I simply hope that it'll be made for a salary amount that's competitive for my background and experience. So lots of words, no number. And sometimes they'll just say, they're filling out a form, and the human resource person will say, wants a competitive salary. And maybe you just get some points for being prepared to answer that way. But often they'll say, well, of course we'll pay competitive salaries, and I need to fill out this form, or we need to have some kind of a figure. Can you give me a little more detail? And that's when you want to reiterate that the most important thing is to find a job where you can, find a good fit and work on science that keeps you engaged, whatever those factors are. And these issues are more critical to me than the exact salary figure. But I've done some research, and from what I've been able to find, it seems like salaries are falling in the mid to upper 90s for a position like this with a major employer and for someone in my general background. So then the actual number you would give, mid to upper 90s, would depend on research that you can do. And we can talk about that if you have questions. But I think the best research is to find a couple people who have left your lab or your program, or people that in the past year or two who have moved into similar positions, and ask them what they think is a competitive salary. And you're kind of asking them for what they're getting paid, but you don't ask that question. So I'd like to send you a job posting that I'm applying for and getting interviewed for. I'm wondering if you can, since you've been out there a while, can you tell me what you think this would be? And then you can give a more well-reasoned answer to this question. So compensation questions come up during the interview. Any questions?
Go ahead, Eric.
Or was it just background noise?
Okay. Bill, I do have a question, if I may.
Sure.
I was curious, when you get these questions, do you generally see it coming from the HR of the team, or more from the hiring manager?
Way more often from the human resource person. The hiring managers are going to talk to you about the science and the problems they have and what you can do for them in their research. And they'll often turf the salary question. They want HR to take care of the salary question. Often it's the manager's, your future boss's budget that the salary is coming out of. So the human resource person might have to clear any salary or a change in salary with the boss. But it's just better for the human resource people to take care of it. So almost always these questions come from the HR. Sometimes here a question comes up about, well, can I use data I've gleaned from the internet to tell them how much money I need? And I think you should do your research on the internet and find what salary.com or Indeed or Glassdoor, what kind of data you're getting from those sites. And sometimes those are more useful than others. So if you've been to some of those sites, you'll see that they either average individual, like they'll tell you that 5 people have reported that this company pays this job title this much. Other times there's like national data like salary.com, they have a biotech sector jobs and they slice it by job titles. So it's pretty good data, but the problems with the data are sometimes there's not enough information, or that the position, the data that's been reported from individuals doesn't account for seniority in a position. So someone's been a scientist one for 4 years at Genentech, they're probably making more than you will be. So if that's the data you're seeing, that may be less useful to you. And then some of the national websites don't account for cost of living. And so it may be lower or higher depending on where your job offer is than what that company's willing to offer. So if you just say, well, I've checked with salary.com and salary.com says this position should pay 130 and you're offering me 110, the human resource person is going to be like, well, let me tell you all the problems with salary.com. So that's why I think when people are doing their salary research, do the internet searches, but also make sure you check with a couple of people who are actually out there as scientists and who can give you some good feedback. Or if you know an HR person at another company, of course, check with them too.
Thank you.
Any questions before we move on? Okay. So the next time, the next time the job off the salary information comes up is during the phone call. So the recruiter will send you an email and say, we have great news for you. Can we set up a time to talk? They usually don't just send you a job offer cold in the email. And so they want to have this fun call because they're excited and they know you'll be excited. And you'll have a conversation on the phone, listen to everything they talk about, because they'll tell you, here's what the salary is going to be, here's who your boss is, here's the start date, and this is all coming to you verbally. And then often they'll ask you for feedback. And I think your job here is just to, express enthusiasm and appreciation, and then just ask for everything right in writing. It's important not to accept the offer on the spot, because you can never. Well, once you accept the offer, you can't really go back and say, I know I accepted, but actually I wanted to ask for more money. That's not going to work too well. And also, a lot of times the recruiter will ask you to accept a term of the offer during that first phone call, and don't do that either. So, if they'll say, did we get the salary right? And once you say yes, it's hard to go back and, or I know we talked about the start date before and you said that might be a little bit of a problem, but we put the earlier date in there. Can you accept that? No matter what it is they're asking you to accept at that point, you can't, or not accept, you just can't negotiate as smoothly on the spot as if you had time. And so it's very standard to just say, you've hit me with a lot of information. This is really exciting. Great news. I felt that there's a great potential fit. And I really appreciate everything you've done to coordinate this process so far. Could you just send me everything that you've mentioned in a quick email? It'll be really helpful if I could take a look at all the details, and then I'll be able to organize any questions I have, and I'll respond by whatever date as they requested. So usually, between the time you get the job and the required response date is usually a few days. And so they call you on a Tuesday, and by Friday they want you to accept or turn it down. So if you're going to negotiate, calling at 5 o'clock on Friday when that's the deadline, and you're asking for something more, they'll give you more time almost always, but it's probably a little bit impolite. So you want to call at least, Friday morning. Questions about that? I think even when there's a point of clarity to be asked for, like there's something confusing. So for example, sorry, I'm having a hard time with my slides. like something is missing, like the start date was really important and they leave the start date out. This actually happened to someone I was working with recently. There was no start date written in the email. There's no start date mentioned on the phone call, even though that was something that was discussed as being super important. And my advice to the person was like, if they don't mention this, if nothing is mentioned, don't ask about it, because you can just be more smooth when you call them back. So even if something's not there, or if the salary is wildly high, you're like, well, that's more than I ever thought I'd be making, still don't accept it, because you just want to have a calm conversation with yourself and with your advisors and then get back to them later.
Bill, there's a question in the chat.
Sure. Oh, so Mike, is the phone call usually made by a recruiter or HR? Yes, I would say at large companies, almost always. At small companies, it varies. And I think the important second part of that question really is probably, who do you negotiate with? You usually negotiate with the person who gave you the job offer on the phone or who signed the job offer letter. But the person who's making the decisions is your future boss. And so even though the HR person might be the one you're talking to, whatever it is you're asking for, they'll have to probably get the okay from the boss. And so sometimes people go around the HR person, and we'll get to that a little bit later. Sometimes people kind of go around the HR person because you've gotten to know your future boss by this time. You might check with them before you actually make the call to the HR person. We'll talk about that one later. Anything else? Good questions? Okay, we'll move on to job offer content. So you get this job offer letter. What does it include? It'll have a job title and classification, start date, supervisor, the salary, one-time bonus. So if there's like a signing bonus to get you started, an explanation of an annual bonus structure. So sometimes many companies, they'll say, here's your salary and here's, $3,000 if you sign, in the next 2 weeks. And then, in addition to that, we have an annual bonus structure that is based on your performance and on the performance of the company. And it can be up to 5% or 10% is what we usually see of your total salary. And then they'll say how long you have to be there in order to get it, or it's prorated. But that's a lot of companies do that, and it's a great way to boost your overall earnings. The offer letter will explain the stock options or the stock grant that is provided. We'll talk about these later. And then there will be a really rough overview of the benefits that are in the offer. So usually this offer letter is like 2 pages with all these details. So then we'll talk about some of the components of this. So first, how do salaries work? Usually it's there's a range within a classification. So if your job title is going to be scientist 1, the range for the scientist 1 classification is 100,000 to 110,000. And at our company, everybody that's a scientist 1 doesn't make less than 100,000, and they don't make more than 110,000. If they're making more than 110,000, they're not a scientist 1. We've moved them to scientist 2 or whatever. And so most companies may have a target for starting point. So we start people, at the 40th percentile of, so pretty much we know at the beginning of this recruiting process, we're going to pay you we're going to offer you 104,000. And I can talk a little bit about where those numbers come from, but sometimes you hear people say during the negotiation process, they refer to equity issues. And what that means is, in terms of salary, what it means is that we offered you 104,000, you asked for 110, but there's somebody who's been there 2 years who's making 108. And so if we offer the new person more than the old person, people might find out. And so we just can't offer you that much. And usually when recruiters talk about equity issues, I think they're not trying to snow you under. They're just trying to they're being transparent that we just can't pay you that much without moving everybody up. Some other aspects of how the salaries work. Biotech companies within, pretty big employment markets for biotech. There's companies that do benchmarking surveys of all the companies. So there's consulting firms that go around to all the biotech companies and they say, pay us some money, and then we're going to give you a big company-wide survey and collect all kinds of information about salaries within your company. And then we're going to aggregate it with all the other companies in the Bay Area, for example, and give that back to you. This way, you know how competitive you're paying. So you'll see, oh, you're paying a scientist 2 with 4 years of experience and a PhD in pharmacology, 140,000, and there's, 40% of the companies are above you. So you're not paying at the top, you're not paying at the bottom. Some companies will say, Genentech is kind of well known for this. We know from benchmarking surveys that we're offering you this happens in the offer letter or in the conversation. We know that our salaries are the highest possible salaries. And so don't negotiate with us. And they usually mean that, although you might negotiate for other components if it's not salary. What all these salaries do really is make, in general, is sort of tight brackets. So we don't see people making 80 to 120,000 for the same job in the Bay Area in biotech companies. And I guess the good part of that is that employers aren't out to get you, because they know that if they offer you 80,000 for a job that everybody else is making 100,000 for, you're going to find out and leave. And so, I guess there's the good part of that is you're not getting screwed, and everybody's pretty transparent about these things. I guess the bad part is that you're not going to be able to get way more than you're asked for, because they know they don't have to pay you way more. But I always think, why not ask for something more? And if they tell you we're not negotiable on salary, ask for something else. But most companies you can ask for more. It's not going, if you do it right, they're not going to pull the job offer. And what we did a sort of mini survey a few years ago in the career office at UCSF, and we asked people, did you ask for more? How much did you get? And the people who asked for more got 3 to 7% usually. So if you got offered 100,000 and you get 105, that was a good ask, right? So it's not a ton more, but add that up over the the course of your career, because hopefully you won't go backwards in your salary, and that's always going to build on it. So, so I think everyone should ask for more. I recognize how uncomfortable that is for some folks, and so what I hope this slide made you feel good about is, if you don't ask for more, you might be leaving a little bit of money on the table, but not tons of money. And yet the rest of this presentation is really designed to help you get more comfortable about asking for more. I see a question, can you lose an offer by quoting a salary too high? Probably not. This has happened before. It was a few years ago, but a postdoc came in the office and she had just interviewed at a company in San Diego, and they asked her how much she wanted to make. And she said, I'm the main earner in my family, and I would like to buy a house, and I really need to make something like 195, something way over what she was expecting to make. And she's like, I think I messed up. Should I call them back and say I would work for less? And I'm like, not at this point. See what happens, and then have a negotiation, or try to negotiate if they pull the offer. But I also asked her how she did that. So I think if she went in and said, I'm not working for 100, if she threw down hard and tried to barter, they might have pulled the offer, not because of the dollars, but because of the attitude. But in this case, they just called her back and they were like, we can't offer you, anything close to what you've asked for. The job pays 120 or something. But we took to heart what you said about purchasing a house, and we've negotiated with our bosses to get you into the executive house buying package, where we get you a low interest loan or something. We co-signed for the loan. There's some package that they gave her because she asked for this, she didn't get the money, but she told them what she needed, and she got some of what she needed. So I think if you guess wrong on how much you should be making and you guess way high, they probably won't pull the offer as long as it's done politely and with some of the language I'll share later in this workshop. Another question, is the job title negotiable? For example, your experience will match a senior scientist more than a scientist too. Could you ask for it? Yeah, I've seen that happen before. And that's something I would probably talk to the boss about, because by that time you'll have had, and not the HR person, you will have had lots of conversations with your boss about the position and about the role, long conversations, a whole day worth of talk with people in the company about the role. And that's when you could go back and say, when the job was posted, it was a scientist 1, and I've seen the job postings for the scientist 2. After talking, it seems like what you want from me is more scientist 2 activity. Is there a disconnect there? So I wouldn't say, can you make me a scientist 2? I would just say something like, is there a disconnect we can discuss to make sure that everything's fair? And they'll either say yes or no, but at least you ask. And then they would have to, of course, give you the higher salary. Good question.
There was one more question earlier, Bill, from Dennis. These benchmarks are done by organizations internally, or are there good resources available to job seekers?
Oh, yeah. Good question. I've tried to buy that survey. The main survey in the Bay Area is called Radford, RADFORD, and you can read about it, but you can't get the data. It's by companies, for companies. They don't share it with job seekers. I've tried to purchase it, and they're like, no, because we know what you'll do with it. You'll tell everybody. Yeah. So unfortunately, you can't get that information. But I have talked to some students and postdocs who knew someone in HR at a company, or someone knew a venture capitalist that had access to that data, and they could get that also. So, but most likely you probably won't have that information. Other questions coming up? Can you negotiate about? Yes. So very common to have conversations with the employer about paying for and sponsoring for visa. Our recommendation in our office is to do that as late as possible. If the company's not bringing it up, I wouldn't tell them, before the job offer comes, just so you know, I'm going to need a visa sponsorship. It has happened where they haven't asked. The job offer gets made, and then you bring it up, and by that time they're committed to you, and they're more likely to bend over backwards to get that done for you, or a different type of visa. But I think it's not so much a negotiating item. I've never seen a company say you have to pay for it. But so it's basically, can you get me a visa or not? And if they decide to sponsor you, then that will be part of it. I'm talking with someone this week who is just working through that, and she's going to get it. They're going to sponsor her. So it's not clear exactly what mechanism they'll use, but they'll get her there. Any thoughts about that one, Sudha, or?
I can add. So most employers would probably, it's a work visa. So it'll probably be a H-1B or a O-1. H-1B legally, you cannot pay for it. The employer has to pay for it. So it's something that's good for you to know as a job seeker. O-1 also, most cases, it will be done by the employer, as Bill said. So what would be useful is to be aware of the basic visa options that you have, because very often the HR might know, but the hiring managers generally don't, unless they have had an international team reporting to them. So understanding the basic concepts is super helpful. And then going with viable options, like for example, if you're going for a nonprofit, which is a university-based postdoc, to a for-profit industry and asking for a H-1B, you have to understand there is cap subject options for H-1B, which means you have an April deadline and October 1 start date. So those are factors sometimes are very tough for employers to work around. So which is why it's good to know that you have a backup of an O1, and you have a profile that is which is pretty competitive in that field. So then they can actually work with their HR team and their international office team to see that, hey, can we make this happen? Especially if they really like you as a candidate. So things to think.
Yeah, great. I didn't know that by law, the H-1B has to be paid for by the employer. That's good to know. Thanks. Let's see. If there's no other questions, we'll move on to stock offers. So there are companies that whose stock is traded on the public market, and companies that are pre-IPO or they're privately held companies. So there's two kinds of companies, basically. And in both kinds of companies, there's often stock offered as part of the job offer. Much more common that stock is offered in the pre-IPO, the private companies that are startups or new companies, they're not yet on the public markets. And I guess I've seen stock offered as part of the offer either at companies that are pre-IPO or like giant companies like Pfizer. A lot of companies, mid-sized and large companies, don't offer stock as part of the offer, initial job offer. But the first thing you want to pay attention to is it an option to purchase stock at a future date, or is it a stock grant? So a stock grant would be, here's $1,000 shares of stock as part of our incentive to have you come work for us. It's kind of like a signing bonus. Those stock shares, those shares are yours. It's much more common to have an option to purchase stock at a future date for a certain price. And it will tell you what the vesting schedule is. So how much of that stock can you actually take ownership for over what period of time? And so the whole reason for them to do this is because the longer you stay at the company, the more valuable you are. And so they want to keep incentivizing you by not giving you all this stuff at once. So the questions that you should be asking, I guess, are, is it a stock option? Is it option to purchase stock at a future date? Or is it a grant where I get it now? Or is it a grant where I get it over a period of time? Vesting is that period of time. And usually it's like 25% a year over 4 years. So on your 4th anniversary, 100% of those stock shares would be vested. And the thing to think about is, what are the strike price? I have an example in a second, but the strike price is what is the price that you can buy the stock at? So you're being offered to purchase stock in the future at a fixed price. And if you're purchasing it at a price that's lower than the actual value, you're making money. How many shares are outstanding? So if you're the 10th employee at a company and they're giving you 10,000 shares, you'd probably want to say, well, what percentage of the company do I own of all the shares? That would be a good question to know. And what's the probable IPO or buyout timeline? So what's the exit strategy for the company? And when is that likely to happen? So is it going to be next year, or is it going to be years from now? None of those reasons are reasons that you would turn down a job offer, but it's good to know as part of these things. So as an example, it might be, as part of your offer from a company that has not been traded publicly yet, there's an option to purchase 1,000 shares of stock, and the vesting schedule is 25% annually. The strike price, which is the value of a share on your start date, is $1. So then, fast forward 4 years to your 4th anniversary with the company. Now they've issued their IPO, and the share price on that market is $10 a share. You can purchase those shares for $1,000 total because you got them at $1 a share, and sell them for $10,000 the same day, and your profit is $9,000. Does that make sense? Any questions about stock? Would stock shares be a good place to negotiate if you're limited in salary? Yes. We see lots of postdocs ask for more stock, or students ask for more stock as part of their offer, especially when salary is non-negotiable or you don't get as much as you hoped. It seems like when stock markets are hot, people always want to negotiate for more, for more options, but realize that things go up and down. And I would personally always try to negotiate for salary over stock, especially at this point in your careers when this is your first job, and those shares could be worth zero. Also, right? Lots of biotech companies fail, so I'd always probably want to ask for more money. But some people have a bigger risk tolerance than I do. Another question about stock. How are options handled when leaving a company before? Yes, good question. So my understanding is that if you leave the company at 3 years, the stock is still yours to purchase. Wait a second. Oh, vested annually. No, right. Sorry, you get to take the amount that if you stayed 3 years, you get 750 shares. I don't know what I was thinking. And you have to stay there in order to get the benefit of that, but it's still yours. The 750 that you made through your 3 years is still purchasable at $1 a share and sellable at the higher price. So one-time cash bonuses are pretty common, and we've seen people who don't get more salary. You ask for more salary, they say no, and then you can come back and say, is it possible to get some one-time bonus money, or just call it one-time money? I guess the thing that's fairly common, even with companies that say we're not negotiating on salary. We've seen people go back and ask for one-time money. We remember that it's taxable, so it's 30-40% less than what they're actually giving you at the end of the year. Sometimes companies, if you're moving across the country, sometimes companies consider moving expenses as a bonus. So we don't pay for your moving expenses, but we'll give you a $10,000 bonus. You'd want to know, when do you get it? Do you get it before you start work? At the end of your first month? Do you have to stay? Is it tied to the length of the company? So in your offer letter, it will say, here's $10,000, at the end of your first month. But if you don't, excuse me, if you don't stay a year, you owe us back. That's pretty awkward for the company to go after a poor first-year scientist, but I actually don't know how often it's enforced. But again, the goals are to keep you at these companies. And then, is there an acceptance deadline? They call it an exploding bonus. If you accept by next Friday, you can have an extra $10,000. If you accept after that, you still have the offer, but you don't get the bonus. So it's all good to know what those are about. It's kind of a high pressure technique. If you don't need, so Marta's question, if you don't need relocation expenses, could you then ask for that money as a signing bonus? Yes, smart strategy. We've seen that happen pretty frequently. And is there a range of usual signing bonus? Usually, it seems like we see it's pretty wide, like 2,500 to 10,000 for signing bonuses. And also, you don't have to have like a good reason to ask for signing bonuses. Sometimes we've heard people say, I don't have a car and I'm going to have to commute to South San Francisco to your biotech company. And I've been a postdoc for, 4 years. Postdocs don't make a lot of money and I haven't been able to save a lot. Would it be possible to get something so that I could put a down payment on a car and get started, in my professional life? And often the company will say yes, but you may not have had to give that reason, because you might give that reason and then they say, well, we have a bus that you can ride from Safeway. Take the bus. You don't need to buy a car. So I don't know. It's kind of 6 of one and half a dozen the other, whether you want to give a reason. And it might be just as good to say, I realize that, you've gone to bat for me on salary and that's not possible. Is it possible to, get a boost in my first year's income just by having some one-time money to get me started? And they may say yes or no to that.
Well, there was one question earlier. Would companies try to pay part of the salary in stock?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, we have seen like startup companies. So I've only seen that in really small companies where they say, we're not Genentech yet. We're going to be Genentech. We're not there yet. We're 10 people and we have our first round of funding and we're trying to make it last as long as possible. So we know that we can't pay as well as Genentech, but we think we offer some things that are pretty attractive, such as we're going to give you a bigger chunk of ownership that's going to be worth more someday than salary, which it may or may not, but that's usually the way it's packaged. It's not like they're not, I guess they are being pretty explicit that they're paying you stock in lieu of salary. And that's just something you have to decide if it's worth it at that point. But yes, we have seen that at like startup companies. Good questions. So we had that list of things that you'll see in your job offer that like, here's all the different components of the job offer. Some things you can negotiate for, some things you can't. We talked about, do people, go from scientist to 1 to scientist 2 because they asked? Not common, but sure. Start date's really common. Salary, signing bonus, stock are pretty common. Relocation package, they're offering $10,000, but you do some searching and you're like, this is going to cost $15,000 to get to Boston. Can you give me more? That's pretty common. A lot of times people ask about vacation, and that's not common, but not impossible. And it seems like there's no rule here, but it seems like the bigger the company, the more established the company, the less likely you're going to be able to negotiate for vacation, because people love vacation, right? And if the person on the next bench over finds out that you have 4 weeks and they have 3 weeks, they're not going to be that happy, right? What's more common is like, we have so many international postdocs, and someone will say, you're offering me 3 weeks vacation, which is pretty common in the Bay Area for starting. You're offering 3 weeks, and I'd like to travel halfway around the country once a year with my family to visit my parents or whatever. And, that takes 2 weeks right there. Would it be possible for me to have 4 weeks vacation or 4 weeks leave time every year, but I recognize you won't have to pay me for that? So you could first ask for just the time and see if they give it to you. And if they say no, then ask if you could have the extra week unpaid. So that's pretty common to get.
Bill, I'm curious. I am hearing this more on one-on-one counseling. Now people are trying to negotiate hybrid workplace, remote working. So are you seeing that? And what are your recommendations around that?
I would hope that the company has made it clear that that's possible as part of the recruitment process these days, especially in the Bay Area. If it isn't, I wouldn't bring it up until after the job offer comes. And if they haven't clarified their policy on hybrid work by then, then I would bring it up. But in the Bay Area, people are just saying, we know we're going to have to do this in order to do that. Or at the very least, they're talking about core hours, like our core hours are 10 to 2. But even that, some companies are saying, all right, we have core hours where everybody needs to be working, but some will be at home and some will be, in lab. So I think, I wouldn't bring it up before, because it doesn't really advantage you to bring it up, since most companies have a policy. And if they haven't told you what the policy is, by the time they give you offer, then bring it up as part of the negotiation. Are they expecting, so Maxine's question, are they expecting negotiations or must-haves? Would expecting whatever they offer? Oh, no, I think, so this is a great question. I'll answer the second one first. If you get offered a job and you've done your research and you know that it's competitive and you're happy with it, I still think you could ask for more. And my feeling is, like, y'all are postdocs or graduate students who've been working for a lot of years at low salary for high investment of yourself. Why not try to get as much as you can? It's not being selfish. It's advocating for yourself is not selfish. On the other hand, if you're just like, this is awesome, this is so much better than what I expected, and you accept it, they aren't going to see you as naive. I think your next job, everybody should negotiate for, because then by the time you take your next job in a few years, salaries have moved around and people have moved around enough that you'd be doing yourself a disservice by not asking for more. And most companies aren't expecting negotiations to be must-have. And most postdocs and students I work with also don't see those as must-have. It's like, I'm probably going to accept this job by the time I got to this point, unless I have two offers. I'm probably going to accept this job, and I'm just going to see if there's something I can get that's a little more. Okay. Let's see. So I think I covered vacation. So we'll talk about the process now. And so what most people tell me is it's good to know all of that information, like what goes into an offer and how do I know if it's competitive and what things can I ask for. But really what makes me nervous is that phone call that I'm going to have with the person when I've never done this before. What things do I say and how does it typically unfold? And so that's kind of what the rest of this content is about, and I welcome questions. So the first thing is, I think it's better to do it on the phone rather than email. It's just easier to sense what the other person is thinking and how it can come off cold. It's hard to not sound like things are must-haves when you're doing an email, and you don't necessarily want to convey that you're negotiating hard if you don't have to. It typically begins with the person who signed the job offer letter, as we talked about before. In other words, if the recruiter signs a job offer and you called the boss and said, this has happened a lot of times actually. The job offer says that you want me to start in 2 weeks, but when we were talking during the interview, you sounded a lot more flexible. Is that something I should talk to the recruiter about? And the boss will probably say, oh no, let me take care of that. But if you talk to the recruiter, they might say, the job offer is what it is. We'd really like for you to come in 2 weeks. And so you want the softer answer. And usually the boss is going to be the person who's more flexible, especially if you had that conversation before. So you'll start positive. So always start the conversation with something that's great about the job. And then some kind of a transition statement. I have 2 items to discuss after reading over the job offer that you sent. And so this purpose is so, if you just say, I have some question, I have a question, and I have another question, I have another question. So I would be specific about so they'll know where you are in the agenda. And then if you're going to ask for more money, the best leverage is a competing offer. If you don't have a competing offer, the next best leverage is some statistics or competing interviews you've had or anecdotal information you've gotten. This is where I'm talking. If you can talk to someone who's been out there a couple of years, that's going to be it's hard to argue with. I talked to several people at other companies. They suggested that a competitive salary for a position like this would be, $100,000, and you've offered me $95,000. Is there something we could do to bring that up? It's hard to argue with information that you got from other people. So that's kind of the best information. if you don't have anything else to use as leverage, leverage is the thing that you're using to make them give you what you want. Why not try as like your own need? So I need to buy a car, or I have extra moving costs. Can you pay for that? Personal things. It's not very good. It's not a very good way to make them say yes, but it can work also. So then ask for what you want in general terms, not a specific number. Always and encouragingly thank them for all the work that it's going to take to redo the offer if they agree to that. Summarize what you understand the agreement has been, then follow up by email, and always express appreciation and thank the other person. And if you do all these things, they're not going to pull the offer just because you asked for something. So that question comes up a lot. They offer me something. If I ask for something else, is it considered a counter offer? And they're going to say, no, we can't give you what you want. So the job offer is pulled. The only couple times I've ever seen that happen is when the person who was negotiating came out too hard and just said, this offer is really low, and I would like this much more. The company's like, oh, I think we just can't make you happy. We're going to walk away from the offer. So don't do that. So then some pretty detailed how-tos, stepwise. First, decide if you're going to accept that, if you're likely to accept the job. As I mentioned, most of the time, if you only have one offer, you're probably going to accept it. But be confident and know that even though you want to accept the position, it's normal to ask for something. The person you're negotiating with probably asked for something when they took that job, and it's just common practice. But also, if the job is wildly more than you ever thought it was going to be in terms of salary and everything else, maybe you don't need to ask for more. But I think in 90% of the people I talk to, they should probably ask for more. The second thing, after you decide if you want to take the job, prepare. Go over the job offer letter, prioritize your questions and requests, write out how you're going to say it, practice with someone. These are important conversations. Get some feedback, make an appointment with our office, talk to Sudha, get lots of advice on how to go through this process. And then, so suppose a typical list of start, I'm going to start talking about the start date. Is it 1 month or 2 weeks? Can you clarify? And then, my target was $90,000. They offered $86,000. I was hoping to start, based on some benchmark data that I got that said 90,000 is competitive. The signing bonus, I'm going to request $4,000 for a car and rent. And then I'm also going to ask for an explanation of the stock plan. I may not ask for more money. I just want to know how it works. Step 3 is to initiate the negotiation and the request. So start positive. First of all, I wanted to just say how thrilled I am to have received this offer. Excuse me. I do have a number of questions. So this is your transition, your agenda setting. These questions run the gamut from salary issues to the start date, or things like, I've outlined 2 main points along with a couple of clarification questions about the items presented in the email you sent to me. Is this a good time to discuss these, or should we set another time? Or do you prefer to do this by email? So ask them what their preference is. And then start the discussion. So this is where you mention why it is you're asking for what you want. So my first question was about the salary. The letter you specified, the letter you sent specified a salary of $90,000. I've done some information gathering online and through colleagues in similar positions, and it seems as if the going rate for this sort of position in the Bay Area and for someone with my background is more in the range of the mid-90s. Is there any flexibility in the salary level for this position that might bring it closer to this level? So you didn't say, you offered me 90, I really need 96. It's just that very sort of soft language, because you want them to say, let me see what I can do for you. That's really the answer that you want to get. And then there's going to be some back and forth with the things that you ask about, and you go through your agenda, and then you start wrapping this up. And you should always summarize about the different points. So I understand now we're locked into the start date, and it needs to remain as it is in the offer letter you sent. And So that apparently the person offered to go check on the salary. I really appreciate your willingness to check on the flexibility around salary for this position, especially since they probably told you how much trouble that was going to be to get salary. So I'll be prepared to respond quickly when I hear back from you. I'm really excited about wrapping this up too, and appreciate your help in getting together the information that I need to finalize my decision. Is there anything else you need from me at this point? And then I would also write an email at the end of that to just make sure everything's firm. And then you wait for their counter offer. So you've told them what you need. Usually in your first job after training, they send you a job offer letter. You ask for the things you want. They say yes or no, and then it's over. That might be different as you go through your career, or if you've seen colleagues get faculty jobs where they're starting up a lab, the backs and forths go, for a month. But for this type of job, I recommend wrapping up all of your asks into one phone call. And then when they tell you whether they can do it, you have a decision to make, either counter offer or politely turn it down. So that's kind of how it goes. I mentioned at the beginning, there's all this complicated information about how to do negotiation. This is actually a really good book, Getting to Yes. It's like about how to use negotiation as a life skill. So I do recommend it, but it's not about salary negotiation. It doesn't have like quotes for how to ask for more money in it. This video at Stanford's website is, I think, really good for lots of practical information and why people should ask for more as well. So that's all I have in terms of content. Happy to answer questions if you have them. How about those quotes that I put in there? Do those sound like things you can say?
There are a couple of questions coming up in the chat.
Okay. Oh, sure. What are the similarities and differences with negotiating your salary and benefits when you're a year or two more here or two? Oh, so that's a good question. I think the answer depends on whether you're deciding to stay at your company or not. And I think you'll find most of our postdocs and students that leave say, within a year or two, I start getting calls about other jobs. And I think it's always good to talk to those people. You get a call from a recruiter, at another company, or a third-party recruiter, a headhunter, and they're talking to you about some jobs. Even if you're pretty happy, why not have a conversation with those people? Because you might find some information that you didn't know about things like salary and benefits that you could take to your boss. And so I guess the only time you'll have another, I guess if you're leaving your company and going to your next job after a few years, I guess the conversation is really pretty similar. I think where it gets different is at the executive levels, when there's all kinds of perk packages to negotiate for, and support, and who's going to be in your team, and can you negotiate for more money for bigger staff, and those, or even around the research priorities that you want to work on. But probably 1 or 2 more years, it's pretty much like this one. Negotiations on Zoom preferable. Oh, yeah, I would say if you can negotiate over Zoom versus the phone, that's better. It still seems like what I see mostly is phone calls, but yeah, I think that'd be great if you can see a person face to face. That's always going to be better. Let's see, Marta asked, if you're very interested in one job and are moving forward, would you recommend to start another interview process only to have leverage? Yes, that is a good idea. And then make sure the company knows it too. I wouldn't call, if there's not a reason to, so company A is about to give you a job offer, company B calls you and says, do you want to interview? I wouldn't specifically call company A and say, hey, I'm interviewing a company B, but you're probably going to be talking to this recruiter, and if you can make it come up, it's good to let those people know, because then they're going to push harder to get you what you want. So yes, absolutely. And the next question might be, what if I'm really not interested in company B? Should I still take the interview? Absolutely, because you never know what you're going to learn. You might not know, you might think you're not interested and be persuaded after you get there. I've seen that happen a lot of times. Those of us who are parents, so for parents, okay to ask for some flexibility in your schedule now and then? I think so. Absolutely. And I think most companies try to be really family friendly around these things. I don't know that you need to build it into the negotiation. I would probably try to get the answer to the question about how flexible the company is through the interview process and through talking to potential colleagues. And so have the answer to the question before you have to negotiate. And then knowing that other colleagues in the company have said, yeah, it's pretty loose around here in terms of taking care of kids, and having that information, then you know that you can ask your boss, on an ad hoc basis. But I don't think I would necessarily negotiate for, a specific issue about picking up kids or whatever. I think companies are just so much more flexible than your PIs probably are about that stuff. Mike asked, if you're using a competing offer to negotiate, how much or how little detail should you give while negotiating? Oh, yeah. So we had a postdoc. You should be prepared to provide the offer letter, or tell the company up front that you don't know the exact salary, but you've heard that it's going to be the offer from the competing salary, hasn't been issued yet, but you've been told it's in the range of, something that's higher than what they're offering. And of course, don't lie. But I know this was years ago, but a postdoc told me that they got an offer from a company. They said they had another one for more money. They didn't. And the company that they did have the offer for said, oh, great, we really want you, send us the offer letter and we'll beat it. And then he didn't have an offer letter. And when they found that out, they withdrew their offer. So don't do that. And I'm sure none of you would, but I guess it seemed like a smart strategy to that person, and it backfired on him, unfortunately. And I have to say, I've seen it go the other way too. I'm giving you the warning part, but people like, yeah, I got away with that. But I just think being honest and transparent is always the best way to go. So I advise you not to do that. And then, how is the current job market for inflation environment affecting salary appreciation? I don't have information on that yet, to be honest. I don't know how, we're in an environment where the inflation numbers are so, I guess, recent that I don't know if companies are responding to that yet. So I guess to Lucas's question, I don't know the answer. I'm sorry. I don't think it's a really strong negotiating position to say we're in an inflationary environment, and so I hope you offer, I need another $5,000. I would find another reason to ask for more money, even if the back thing, in the back of your mind, it's because it might be worth less next year. You guys ask good questions, and a lot of them. Anything else?
Bill, I have one.
Okay.
So when a person has an offer and they are hopeful that they would get a second offer because they just started in the early stage of interviewing with the second company, how can they negotiate for time on the decision?
Yeah, this is common. So transparency is the best thing. So I would recommend calling the company that did give you an offer and has given you a deadline, and just tell them, this language really works. Write this down somewhere. I should put it in a workshop. Tell them the situation, and then use the words, I feel like I owe it to myself. I feel like I owe it to myself to play this out and see what the other job offer and the other position is like. I understand if you can't give me time, but I would really value the opportunity to make a decision with all of the information at hand. Does that make sense? Because so I owe it to myself. It's hard. That makes the person think like, that makes the person negotiating with the recruiter. It's hard to argue with that because it makes them think, oh yeah, I would probably do the same thing. Most companies don't want you to take, to be forced into a job offer. So if it's a matter of a week or two, they'll probably give it to you. One of the factors that they'll be thinking about is how long they can string along the other candidates. So there's probably a number 2 and a number 3. You were number 1. And if they think number 2 and number 3 are also going to go away, they might not give you the time. But if they think they can string those people along, they probably will. What they don't want is a completely failed search where you go away and then the other people go away too. Yeah, that's a good one.
That's helpful. Thank you.
And the faster you call them with that, the better it is. The better it is.
Any other questions for Bill?
Oh, thank you for putting that in. I like to owe it to myself. If the negotiations are making the signing being delayed, will the start date change? Oh, that's something you'd want to ask about, but probably. It seems like most times the actual start date, I think I kind of mentioned it already, your future research boss is probably not as stringent about start dates as the HR person. But if you're asking for more time to make the decision, you probably want to also ask for time on the other end, to add time to the start date. And if they can do that, they probably will. So awesome questions. I will share the slides with Sudha and she can distribute them.
Thank you so much, Bill.
Thanks to everyone, and good luck with your job searches and good luck with asking for more money. I hope you feel a little more prepared to do it from now.
Thanks a lot, Bill. Really appreciate your time and doing this for us.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Great questions. I really enjoyed being on the sessions.
Me too.
Take care. Bye. We'll see you on the next one for the Career Industries by Scientists.